Hi folks, my name is Steve Cole, and as many of you realize already, I'm really just some guy. But I have a really cool job, and that job is to be the executive director of the Economic Development Foundation. I know, economic development, is it not the best? One of the things about the Plymouth Economic Development Strategy that I think makes it particularly unique for a community our size is that we are innately focused on the arts. Arts and entrepreneurs are an intimate part of our strategy. We support the arts, and I'm very glad to be joined on stage by Madam President Jennifer Harris. 4 years ago, we began working together on this endeavor, right? Nearly half a decade, and I tricked the woman by telling her she only needed to spend about 3 to 4 hours a month on something like this. And here we are 4 years later, and we never thought that, at least I never thought, maybe I did think, that we would be here tonight. I genuinely see that poetry is an integral part of the growth of a complex society. Some of you have heard me use an old Adams quote before when he was minister to France, begging for support for the American Revolution, and they were teasing him in some ways because he was interested in war and politics. I will poorly paraphrase his response. He basically said that he was only interested in war and politics so that his children could be focused on things like math and science, so that their children could be focused on things like art and poetry and porcelain. And he specifically calls out poetry. And that quote stayed with me. Now, I'm not necessarily smart enough to understand most poetry, and some of the people on this stage already know that, right, Stephan? But Walt Whitman told us that in order to have great poetry, you have to have a great audience. And on a cold, blustery night in October, all of you came out to see this amazing performance. Give yourselves a round of applause, please, because you are the great audience. You are the great audience that these great poets need, and I know Plymouth is ready for this. So we formalized the America's Hometown Laureates into a nonprofit with Jennifer Harris here as our president. And I'm very glad to say that we are a real organization, nonprofit, 501c3. So all of the things that you had a chance to buy out there earlier, that gets reprogrammed into the nonprofit so that we can continue to do events like this. So I'm going to turn the microphone over at this time to our Madam President, Jennifer Harris. Thank you so much for organizing all of this and bringing the amazing Maggie Smith here, and for Stephen Delbos being our amazing Plymouth Poet Laureate.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, folks, for attending tonight. I will tell you, most of you know that I was the Plymouth Public Library Director. I was there for 27 years. So I looked back in my folders and realized how many years I had been doing poetry programming. So I have a deep commitment, and it just turns out that this position as the president of America's Hometown Laureates fits in with my skill set, which means telling people what to do and organizing and making sure there's food and flowers on the tables and matching tablecloths. That's my key. But also in supporting our Poet Laureate program, as well as bringing in authors and poets. So that is our plan in the future. And one of the ways that we're doing that is through getting grants. We've received at least 6 grants. Several came from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, so I'm giving them credit as a sponsor to tonight's event. We also were very fortunate to have a new sponsorship from the Plymouth 400 Legacy. A substantial and committed relationship has begun, I believe, so thank you folks for that. And also, what started this event was through the Town Promotions Grant Fund. It's meal tax dollars from the hotels, and so this feeds back into our community. So when Stephen says economic development, he really means let's get people here, and my goal is let's get people here who want to hear poetry as well as having an opportunity of reading and sharing their poetry. So while I'm thanking our sponsors, I also want to thank our fellow board members, of which Stephen Cole, who is our clerk, yes, he takes the minutes. Glenda Richards, who's with the Books and Sundry pop-up tonight, selling the books. She's our treasurer. We have Melissa Kinney, who was unable to attend tonight and was sorry. There's been some illness going around, as you folks know. So Melissa is with the Plymouth Bay Cultural District, and we have our beloved, Elizabeth Shanahan-Jewett, who is leading PAC TV into a new area called Local Scene, that's SEEN. So you folks who get YouTube so that you can watch the NFL Ticket, you can also see all sorts of wonderful postings for the local scene. So I think Amy Naples. I do this, there's something in my head. Amy Naples, who has been kindly cleaning up back there and also brought our wonderful chairs. So Amy is the executive director of the Plymouth Area Chamber of Commerce. So we have a great group that works on this, and we plan to continue to do our work. And at this point, I have one more announcement, then I will be done. About 2 minutes before we came up, Stephen Delbos and Maggie Smith and myself created a haiku. And the haiku, we're crediting all of us. The haiku is, we are announcing call for poets for our next poet laureate. So what that means is, starting November 1st, we will post the applications on our website, hometownlaureates.com, and we will start this cycle again, and Stephen will be very much involved in the next selection process. So keep the poetry coming, and at this point, I would like to bring up to the stage Stephen Delbos.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Stephen. Thanks to the whole Hometown Laureates board, and thank you all for coming here. Really wonderful evening. Really exciting to be here and to have Maggie here, and also great to announce the continuity of the laureate program. One thing I was frightened of was being Plymouth's first and last ever poet laureate. So I'm really thrilled to know that the program will continue. I just think it's so vital to the town, and I'm really happy that it's going to keep going. I'll read some poems and then get out of the way and introduce Maggie. I want to read this quote from one of my desert island poets, Rainer Maria Rilke, from his Duino Elegies, and the quote goes like this: "Begin ever new again, the praise you cannot attain. Remember, the hero lives on and survives. Even his downfall was for him only a pretext for achieving his final birth." I love the hope in that quote, and I love the idea of moving from elegy to praise. And that's how I've organized the next several poems that I'll be reading, moving from elegy to praise. The first is entitled In Memory of Fire, and it's about memory and an elegy to the past. Until our flesh gives birth to bones, when the bridges of our fingers fall to earth, until our eyes ignite in memory of fire, flash bulbed as the dead sockets of blind men, when this prophecy is elegy, we won't remember that May evening in Morton Park when the flickering lanterns of lightning paraphrased our faces, but until the beds in which we slept are cinders, and those cinders ash, and ash a vacant story for the wind, until that city where I reigned the wild carriage of your tears becomes a tenement of ice, the borrowed letters of our names a scattered flock of startled crows. The days we shared are indestructible. I've been thinking a lot about disasters lately, and all the awful things that are happening all the time. And I feel compelled to somehow address them in one way or another. This is a poem that I wrote in response to the bombing of the Boston Marathon in 2013. And I was sitting, looking out at the harbor and, thinking about the news back then and trying to kind of come to grips with that event and come to grips with the limitations of language in coping with tragedy. And that's what this poem is about. It's called Harbor View. And it begins with an epigraph from the Boston Globe, April 15th, 2013. The headline was "Terror at the Marathon." As you'll remember, they found the perpetrator in Watertown, which was where my mother was born. Harbor View. Mud flats bubble to horizon, leaching gold from dawn over milk blue ocean. In a town called Water, the cops caught some kid who stole the legs of marathoners, fled and huddled in a backyard motorboat to die. Hyacinths plump as urchins. Gurnet Lighthouse concedes to the sun, a scratched cornea too tender for air. Violence tints this harbor view. In an elegiac century, we have run aground somewhere our language is no use. In days of depth charts, sea monsters crouched uncertain shadows at corners of maps. We struggle in parchment surf, tangled black ropes of latitude, no North Star to navigate. Shall we return to salt or manage the mystery with a simple truth? Tide rises like a shark, smashing equilibrium. We are eaten or swim. The great British poet William Blake said we must be on the lookout for minute particulars, little details that make all the difference. And this poem is called Tiny Miracles, and it's a cry from the adolescent heart. Tiny Miracles. Tonight, I watched the tiny miracle of street lamps waking, false stars strung where sunlight failed as I leaned on a phone booth by a boulevard thick with numb machines. Tungsten teaches us, darkness falls, but rise and burn, yes, nevertheless. Stumbling home on a decade-old dawn, I saw stoplights beat like blinking hearts, but the bloodshot stare of a high school dropout all-night gas station cashier shone lonelier. In youth, I did not know the body is a hollow place we hold a spark. Oh, matchstick life, please keep me lit. That's secretly about when I was a teenager and dating this girl who lived in North Plymouth by the post office, and I would walk home very late at night, much too late for a 17-year-old. I would walk down the middle of the street, and all the stoplights were just blinking. Ah, the good old days. I also am an avid translator, and translation is very important to my creative work. So I'd like to read a couple translations from a book by a Czech surrealist poet named Vítězslav Nezval. And in these poems, they're a series of numbered poems from a long serial poem called Bizarre Town. And he creates a kind of mosaic of his town based on these short surrealistic kind of images, and every town really is a bizarre town, I suppose. So I think they're somewhat universal, though somewhat strange. I'll read 3. Under the molding of the rectory, covered in silver tinfoil, hang loose strings fastened to the tips of pillows that swaddle 12 small children. as they swing above 12 wooden cups, 12 ostrich eggs sit in. 12 huge roosters pound their beaks into those enamel shells, which emit, like a carillon, the short tones of a diatonic scale played very quickly, bottom to top, top to bottom, and then at random, composing a lullaby. These are very kaleidoscopic poems. At the table in a low, vaulted room, from whose walls, covered in frames of various sizes, stares the exact same portrait painted 21 times of a man from the 16th century. 21 sisters seated offer a toast to their 21st birthdays with 21 glasses of cut crystal reflecting 21 times 21 low vaulted rooms, from whose walls, covered in frames of various sizes, stares the exact same portrait painted 21 times of a man from the 16th century. Two sisters of charity, holding above their heads open umbrellas. Each at one end of the footbridge the sleepwalker crosses, carefully conceal the sun with those two almost holy parasols, and wait for the moon above the deep darkness their fair hair glitters in to rise, to lead happily the somnambulist with brooding eyes to their quivering, charitably outstretched fingertips in which is concentrated the brilliant spark of sudden awakening. I'd like to read two short poems from my book, Light Reading. And the first one is just a short little lyric. It's called Rosy-Fingered Dawn, which is a quote or a translation from Homer. Probably in the Odyssey, the two most famous kind of images are the wine-dark sea and the rosy-fingered dawn. And Emily Wilson has a new translation of the Aeneid following up on her translation of the Odyssey, which I highly recommend. Rosy-fingered dawn. Flocks of song outside. We drop the glasses words are to bear. Breakable parts for stranger fingers as air and light enfold untouchable birds. It's a little one about staying up too late with someone you should or should not be staying up too late with. I really like music. Anybody like music? You look like a music fan. Yes, okay, that's good. When people tell me they're not into music, it's always the same when people tell me they're not into poetry. It's always it's like saying you're not into food, you know. I don't get it. But the book Light Reading is very informed by music. It's very informed by classical music. There's a great Hungarian composer, György Ligeti, who composed really kind of mind-bending stuff. And he has a composition called Lux Aeterna, Eternal Light, which is what this poem is based on. It's also, Metallica has a new single called Lux Aeterna, but that was after this came out. They're good too. But the poem is about the composition, but it's about kind of seeing and light and senses and being in the world and what it means to be a sentient being, just feeling things all the time. And in this section of the book, all the poems are titled bagatelle, which means a trifle. It's usually associated with classical compositions that are tossed off. They're not symphonies, they're not labored over. They're something kind of spontaneous, which in a somewhat ironic way is then more of a show of the composer's genius, because they can come up with something amazing without overthinking it. So this is Bagatelle for Gheorghi Ligeti, Eternal Light and Honeycomb. Swim in the swarm of voices, vices of silence, lux aeterna, air, colored with tears, not yet battered by swallowing ground. Keep listening, even flame makes a sound. Outside among enormous ashes, trees, wind sifts and microchips in digital cameras register the phenomena. This, too, is lux aeterna. Shut your eyes, your brain a beehive, honey tastes like blood. Eternity, another way to say thank you, but not just yet. Even our organs outlive us, if only briefly, and when we really feel, we say, it struck a chord, so clarify. Emotion lives in eyes and ears like oysters harboring, hoarding pearls. Every chapel, echo chamber, echo chamber. When we call for silence, we only want the single sound, foghorn or boatman's call. I'll read a short selection from the centerpiece of Small Talk, which is a long poem called A Child's Guide to Candor. And it's in 3 sections: Obeyed, Baggage, Conversation, ABC. And I wrote this during the first several years of my oldest son's life. And it's really about the way that parents bequeath vocabulary to children, and the way that vocabulary then kind of forms the framework for how you understand the world. But it's also a lot about just, again, about light and seeing. So I'll just read a little bit from the first part, which is Obeyed. And the poem begins in the morning, classic Obeyed, which should be a poem about lovers wakening in bed and not wanting to get out of bed. And then it proceeds through the evening. Obeyed. My son volleys joy. His dawn voice tries air's tension. Delight in the opening eye of earliest light. Can I say morning is the sound of a boy with a song in his system? I scoop him from bed a tender canister of dream. I used to wonder if I'd wake child again, my life imaginary projection. I wake now with child. Our bodies made a boy who voices the basic secrets of solar plexus. Empty belly melody. Cries scatter pigeoned rooftops, shatter treacle sheen sleep. Dawn Caesarean's sky. Vice light morning covers night's tracks. Churchlight evening inspires skyward faces. Weekend laughter light reminds us of ourselves. Responsibility Monday light brings back practicalities. Showering now light washes memory away. Television disaster light. Square window light why we rent this apartment. Photosynthesize in these distances. Voice light sunburn. Or ocean light, my favorite. Crashing shadows, rainbow sprays, triumph and display. Honey light sunset, blue milky light dawn. Light moves, heavy light, grows and settles, hides, returns. In life's long sunlit breezeway, dust moments return to windowed cigarette dusk in Sarajevo. Satellite moving star in clear Provençal night, 5-minute Senside afternoon, gauzy fog dawn floating under Golden Gate, unplanned moments of communion that propagate and punctuate and ratify a life. The purpose of this might be to harvest clarity. Reviewing the slideshow of memory, what I see is not what I expected. Glory, triumph moments when my name was synonymous with universe, just seemingly insignificant scraps. Galvanized steel urinal in Dublin, door handle in Prague, Coca-Cola cooler in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and dosed imagination never mirrored in real life. Soul's soft steel orb dented over time. Incense of innocence. Soft sprig, he came to us in autumn, when slow oaks grow fast with fire, when grass in parks sparks teeth of frost in this unnameable city, and cobblestones conspire through curtailed afternoons. Autumn air is burnished, and Rilke said we must be rich with summer's bounty or risk solitude for life when light weakens, gardens shudder, and Ohio girls repatriate. All winter sun grew in beds of domesticity, savage creature corralled from womb to world's clamor. What frames the spirit? What guides us to grave solitude beneath the irresistible sparkle of stars? Something inside air, eye awake, pushes light like a curious inspector, touching everything, takes notice, takes note. I lift my son into dawn. He recoils, turning, tightening eyes. We must grow accustomed to light. Quickens us, shapes our days, tells us clearly when we falter or stray. And the last poem I'll read is one that I wrote for the Poet Laureateship way back when, in 2019, so many lifetimes ago. And it's called Poem for Plymouth Cordage. And as we all know, Cordage Park, largest employer in the town and in the area for many, many years, until the 1960s, really, from the 19th century. And it was a place that really put Plymouth on the map in a lot of different ways. The rope was world famous. And ships came in from all over the world with raw materials, which were then woven into rope, which were then taken and used on ships all around the world. What a fascinating metaphor. And as I did a little research all those years ago, one of the great innovative products of the Plymouth Cordage Company was a lubricated heart rope, which, you know, need I say more? I mean, geez, that's a poem in itself. And so this rope, the heart of the rope, the core, the center of the rope, was lubricated with a secret formula, of course, which made it very flexible and very durable. And this was one of their most famous products. And so I just, as I was looking for metaphors, thinking about, this was back coming up to 2020, the 400th anniversary, and how do you even attempt to capture 400 years of history in a poem? And I came upon this idea of Plymouth Cordage. So the poem's about Plymouth, the poem's about the history of Plymouth, the community of Plymouth, the poem's about cooperation, it's about equality, it's about storytelling, which is what culture is, and what history is. And without stories, then we have nothing but a bunch of solipsistic individuals. This is Poem for Plymouth Cordage, and it starts with an epigraph from the Reverend Peter Gomes. We talked about him last night. And his quote is, "First we shape our story, and then our story shapes us." Poem for Plymouth Cordage. Help weave this heart rope, this cordage of words, woven memories, imagination, image and nation, individuals' dreams, 400 years, 12,614,400,000 seconds. We weave the cordage of words, a rope across horizon, gathering every moment we find and write and tell the stories. We take the rope in dinghies and set off toward Europe. Others stay in Plymouth, weaving the rope we carry back eastward around the world, the words, the wars, the bombs, the tragedies and joys, the people, the love, the syllables make lifelines that keep us from drifting into the empty whirlpool of what's forgotten. A story, shivering pilgrims, all aboard over a month, 13 years from home, one birth, one death at sea, desperation their daily ration, water, 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 waves, then Cape Cod, cupped hand, a continent still big enough for everyone. For now, an etching in black and white, ink and paper, the contrast colors of their pauper clothes. When white men first came ashore and Wampanoag braves watched from shadowy pine patches, there was a mirror between them. Each saw the limits of their imagination reflected in the other. Protestants and the people of dawn, a mirror between them no attack could shatter, only understanding to clarify. For 400 years we must still try to clarify. We must find and learn and tell the stories. A story. We stand knee-deep on Brown's Bank and stare into the gaping jaws of autumn. That summer fog swallowed the fireworks. That winter they dredged and dredged the harbor depths. We sledded Burial Hill. That spring was Ziggy's strawberry dipped, stories woven into history. We shape and are shaped by our location. Plymouth, pliant mouth, always telling stories. The lips of language kiss the limits of recollection. Pumpkin comes from Poppacan, meaning grows fourth round. Wampanoag words. Massachusetts, place of the foothill. Plymouth from Plymouth, England, meaning mouth of the river Plym. A story. I was born on a coast's crooked shoulder, where gauze white waves sling shore and sand dunes frame dreams. Where fishermen with missing thumbs used to huddle in fragrant fog from coffee mugs and briar pipes. Night floats the diving bell moon above a wooden flower docked in the harbor. But just now I am lying down to find sleep, reading the braille of stars over Plymouth. Who doesn't want the night sometimes to last forever, so dawn's thumb never swipes sky's screen? Who doesn't want to become the place where they are from? And so these words are stories, strands in the cordage we are weaving. We learn everything we can and share it. We are gathering and carrying this rope around the world. We set out eastward from Plymouth, MA to UK, zigzag across all continents, collecting stories and sending them back to be woven, to keep us together, and everyone helps as we carry the rope under the Golden Gate, over the Rockies, across Ohio, and here we are at Old Exit 6, coming back into town to tie the knot where everything started, where this community is still telling its story. So where should we tie the knot? Where is the heart of your Plymouth? Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce the renowned poet and writer Maggie Smith, a poet, writer, editor, and teacher who has published several books of poetry and prose, including Good Bones, Keep Moving, and Goldenrod. Her memoir, You Could Make This Place Beautiful, is a New York Times bestseller. Her poems and essays have appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Guardian, the Paris Review, Tin House, the Washington Post, the Best American Poetry. When she's not writing, she teaches in an MFA program and lives in Columbus, Ohio with her family, whom she loves very much. And please give a very warm America's Hometown welcome to Maggie Smith.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? I noticed Ohio came up in a couple of those poems. All roads lead to Ohio, as we like to say. It is a joy and a privilege to be here with you all. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, Stephen. And thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you, Glenda. And thank you, Amy. And thank you, Melissa, who I didn't get to meet, but I'm with you in spirit, Melissa, and I hope you feel better. I've been so warmly welcomed here, and I've never been, and I'll be back. So yeah, I will be back. I had a really good pancake this morning, y'all. Really good pancake. I'm gonna read, so I've been, my memoir came out this year. I've been touring mostly for this book of prose. And so honestly, I'm so extra special, delighted to be able to read with Stephen and to be able to read poems. And so I'm gonna read a handful of poems from Good Bones, and then I'll read a handful of poems from Goldenrod. And then we'll talk, and if you have questions, I hope you'll ask. I know sometimes it's strange to sort of raise your hand, or if you have a question in front of a lot of other people, like maybe if you could catch me in a corner, you'd ask a question, or you'd ask Stephen a question. But I hope you'll just be brave and just ask the question, because I'm going to tell you, I've already written these poems. I've already done all the creative hard work to make these things. So the most fun for me personally is hearing what you're curious about. So ask. This is the first poem, and what should have been was intended to be the title poem of this book. And then something happened to what is now the title poem of this book that made everyone decide that it needed to be the title poem. I had to take my daughter out for ice cream to tell her that this was not the title poem anymore, because these are her words. Weep up. It's only technically morning. Not even the birds believe it. From her crib, my daughter tries to wake them, saying weep for wake. Weep up, birds. What else could silence mean to her but sleep? We might be the first awake on our street, the neighbors breathing still regular and slow, all the porches lit, and moths losing their minds in that light. Rising, spellbound in the blurry dawn, I become my mother. 20th century sunrise was just like this, sad, soft focus ochre, like an overexposed Polaroid. The sun is just now brimming over the golden edge of the lawn, and dew begins to sizzle there. In the dark, I hear, weep up, birds, until they do. In case you are a writer in this room, and if you write, you're a writer, I don't care if you're published or not, and in case you have had long spells of nothing coming to you, this one's for you, because the year that I was first a parent, I didn't write for a year. I just couldn't wrap my head around anything but keeping us both alive and present. And so after a year of parenting a colicky newborn, a poem finally came, and I thought no poem would ever come again. And this one did. So I'm telling you this because if it's been a while, they'll still show up. Just make sure you leave the light on for them. First fall. I'm your guide here. In the evening, dark, morning streets, I point and name. Look, the sycamores, their mottled paint-by-number bark. Look, the leaves rusting and crisping at the edges. I walk through Schiller Park with you on my chest. Stars smolder well into daylight. Look, the pond, the ducks, the dogs paddling after their prized sticks. Fall is when the only things you know, because I've named them, begin to end. Soon I'll have another season to offer you, frost soft on the window and a porthole side there, ice sleeving the bare gray branches. The first time you see something die, you won't know. It might come back. I'm desperate for you to love the world because I brought you here. My daughter Violet is now a freshman in high school, that baby. Please tell me how that is possible. Good Bones, this book has a series of poems in it that I call nonnets. They're not quite sonnets. They're the kind of sonnets that you write if you have a toddler, which is they're 14 lines long. They have a loose turn or volta around line 10-ish, and that's about it. But all of them do have something in common, and that's that they were inspired by and take as their epigraph a question she asked me in the car. So I have this theory that when small children get into the car and they hear the automatic door lock, they know they have you. You are a captive audience, and all of those big existential questions that you might sort of wave off in your home or at the park, you are not going to be able to wave away because they've got you until you get to the library or the pharmacy or wherever you're going. So this first one is called Sky, and it begins with her question asked in the backseat of the car from her car seat near the public library in downtown Columbus. I still remember this. Why is the sky so tall and over everything? Why indeed? What you draw as a blue stripe high above a green stripe, white interrupted. The real sky starts at the tip of each blade of grass and goes up, up, as far as you can see. Our house stops at the roof, at the glitter-black overlap of shingles where the sky presses down, bearing the weight of space, dark and sparkling, on its back. Think of sky not as blue, not as over, but as the invisible surround, a soft suit you wear close to the skin. When you walk, the soles of your feet take turns on the ground, but the rest of you is in the sky, enveloped in sky. As you move through it, you make a tunnel in the precise size and shape of your body. I did not answer my daughter's question that way in the car. I like to say it's hard enough to be the child of a poet, and it would just be cruelty and borderline child abuse to have a child ask, why is the sky so tall and over everything, and for you to pull the car over and recite something like that to them. I think I said, I don't know, what do you think? Which is how I answered most questions when they were small, and frankly still do, and I get such interesting answers by just turning it back to them. This poem sort of references that same conversation. It has a title that is a run-in, so it goes right into the first line of the poem. At your age, I wore a darkness several sizes too big. It hung on me like a mother's dress. Even now, as we speak, I am stitching a darkness you'll need to unravel, unraveling another you'll need to restitch. What can I give you that you can keep? Once you asked, does the sky stop? It doesn't stop. It just stops being one thing and starts being another. Sometimes we hold hands and tip our heads way back so the blue fills our whole field of vision, so we feel like we're in it. We don't stop. We just stop being what we are and start being what? Where? What can I give you to carry there? These shadows of leaves, the lace in solace? This soft, hand-me-down darkness? What can I give you that will be of use in your next life, the one you will live without me? Oh, thank you for that. I call that the cake sound, because it's sort of the sound I make when I take a good bite of cake. And it was something I missed, and I didn't realize how much I loved it, the cake sound. I like it more when I have a mouthful of cake, I won't lie. But I missed the cake sound when the lockdown happened, and I had 2 book tours on Zoom, 2 book tours in 2020 and 2021 on Zoom, and it is not the same to read poems on a Brady Bunch screen. It is not the same. You need to have people in the room, and you really need the cake sound, so thank you. I've been thinking about this poem recently because I've been using the word harrowing a lot. Even though, Stephen, as you just said, language feels completely inadequate most of the time, and I say that as a poet. I don't have the words as a parent or as a poet for much of what I see on my phone and on the television and in the world. And harrowing seems like the best word for it. Harrowing. This world is harrowing, harrowing, all harrow as if harrow were what the world is made of, what we are made of, as if harrow were strings to be strummed, tendons and veins to be strummed, as if harrow could be snapped between the teeth, the word, one letter from the white meal inside our bones, the meal we could make of ourselves, harrow, 2 letters, from the bird who might strum with its beak what the body is made of, what the world is made of, and in that strumming become the song. This is my free bird. This is the poem that I, since publishing this poem, can't not read. I've been shouted at, actually, for not reading this poem, not by kind people such as yourselves, in a beautiful space such as this, but by others. This is Good Bones. Life is short, though I keep this from my children. Life is short, and I've shortened mine in 1,000 delicious, ill-advised ways. 1,000 deliciously ill-advised ways I'll keep from my children. The world is at least 50% terrible, and that's a conservative estimate, though I keep this from my children. For every bird, there is a stone thrown at a bird. For every loved child, a child broken, bagged, sunk in a lake. Life is short, and the world is at least half terrible. And for every kind stranger, there is one who would break you, though I keep this from my children. I am trying to sell them the world. Any decent realtor walking you through a real shithole chirps on about good bones. This place could be beautiful, right? You could make this place beautiful. Thank you. One more from Good Bones. This one's for Lauren. I I think she traveled the farthest other than me to be here. I got to fly, though. My little Violet, my 5-year-old Violet is in this poem, and now she's turning 15. And part of what I love about poems, and I was actually talking to someone about this at the reception beforehand, is that they are time capsules. And that even though sometimes I'm tempted to go back and revise poems, that I feel like now I have a different sensibility and I should change it, or, oh, I would describe that differently, or now I feel like that's lazy, or now I think that's sentimental. I let them stand, because by erasing the choices I made in the poem, I'm also sort of erasing that poet that I was at that time. And one of the things I love about the time capsule of a poem is that my children get to stay small in them, even though they won't stay small in life, despite me trying to bribe them to do it. This is called Rain, New Year's Eve. The rain is a broken piano playing the same note over and over. My 5-year-old said that. Already she knows loving the world means loving the wobbles you can't shim, the creaks you can't oil silent, the jerry-rigged parts MacGyvered with twine and chewing gum. Let me love the cold rain's plinking. Let me love the world the way I love my young son, not only when he cups my face in his sticky hands, but when, roughhousing, he accidentally splits my lip. Let me love the world like a mother. Let me be tender when it lets me down. Let me listen to the rain's one note and hear a beginner's song. I sort of joke that my kids, live rent-free and therefore should offer metaphors now and then. How are we doing? Are we okay? A few more? Okay. I'm going to read some poems from Goldenrod, and then we'll chit-chat. This is the title poem. It was not always going to be the title poem. Actually, the original title for this book was Tender Age, which is a long poem at the center of the book. And then I played with a few others, and my editor really liked this one. And then they showed me the cover, and I was like, fine, because they did such a beautiful job with it. So this is Goldenrod. I'm no botanist. If you're the color of sulfur and growing at the roadside, you're Goldenrod. You don't care what I call you, whatever you were born as. You don't know your own name. But driving near Peoria, the sky pink-orange, the sun bobbing at the horizon, I see everything is what it is, exactly, in spite of the words I use. Black cows, barns falling in on themselves, you. Dear flowers born with a highway view, forgive me if I've mistaken you, Goldenrod, whatever your name is, you are with your own kind. Look, the meadow is a mirror full of you, your reflection repeating. Whatever you are, I see you, wild yellow, and I would let you name me. This poem was an unusual one that, like Good Bones, came very quickly. I wrote this poem about my daughter's birth, and I wrote it from a hotel room in Washington, D.C., where I was there to witness the interment of Matthew Shepard's ashes into the National Cathedral. And meeting his parents, thinking about what it is like to lose a child in that way, or frankly, in any way. And so I thought about Violet's arrival, and so in my hotel room that day, I wrote this poem. The title is her birthday, December 18th, 2008. For just a fraction of a moment that afternoon, if we think of time as being a whole, you were the newest person in the world. You were the emptiest vessel on earth, knowing nothing of this place or of yourself, that you even were a self, that a self was something one could be, that one could be at all. And what was being? For that narrowest sliver of a whole, you were the least experienced person on earth. And then you weren't. You knew me before you knew your own body, what to do with your hands, your pink fists battering your face. We swaddled you as if against that confusion, though I tell you that confusion never leaves. The body remains a house unaware of its rooms. And frankly, the poet remains a writer unaware of her own poem, because I never thought until this very moment, explaining where this poem was written and under what circumstances, that there are pink fists battering a baby's face in this poem, written to mourn a child beaten to death and left in Laramie, Wyoming. It never occurred to me until just now. We learn from our poems all the time, don't we? My daughter wrote this poem on accident. She's earning her keep, this one. She is earning the name brand cereal. She is earning the streaming services she requires to watch the shows she enjoys. She said something, again, from the back seat of a car, and it's kind of funny, that Sky, the poem Sky, the Nonnet, she asked me a question about the sky from the back seat of the car when she was 3, and I wrote a poem in response. And when she was 13, 10 years later, she said this from the back seat of the car, and then I added a title to it, and it's in this book. So the title is mine, and it frames the poem, and the words are hers. So it's collaborative. At the end of my marriage, I think of something my daughter said about trees. When a tree is cut down, the sky's like, finally, and rushes in. Even when you trim a tree, the sky fills in before the branch hits the ground. It colors the space blue because now it can. She's a wise one, that one. All right, one more poem. One more poem. I've been thinking a lot about lucky objects, and I keep them with me. I usually travel with them. I'm very, and if you've read earlier books, I talk about the kinds of things that I carry with me on planes. I'm an incredibly superstitious human being, and I believe all the magical things that we're supposed to not believe as adults. I still believe them all. If I weren't Santa, I would believe in Santa. But I am. But I believe in myself. And thank you to Jennifer for bringing me a big hunk of rose quartz, which is something that's very dear to me. So this poem was inspired by a walk during sort of peak lockdown. So it would have been mid-March, snowy still in Ohio. I don't know what mid-March is like here, but it's not spring there. It's winter. And I reached into the pocket of the coat that I was wearing and found 3 objects that my son had clearly left for me to find in my coat pocket. And walking the street alone at night, which felt necessary at the time because we were trying not to run into other people. We were really trying to stay apart. And I just remember, as a single parent too, not being able to sort of cry or seem panicked around my kids. So walking alone at night in mid-March 2020, I could just panic, be sad, and feel my feelings, and then show up with a smile and be fine when I got back. And there was something about finding those objects that made me think that everything was going to be okay. So this is the last poem. It's called Talisman, which is a lucky object. They look like gifts a crow might bring a human girl, desperate to impress her. In the left pocket of my thrifted emerald coat, a scuffed acorn, a glassy black stone, one pink Mr. Potato Head ear. When I touch them, I can believe almost anything. Who's to say they can't keep me safe? Who's to say a bird can't court someone's daughter? But in this life, it's my son who shows his love like a creature that clever, leaving treasures for my fingers to worry against. I carry them like anything I love until they warm in my palm, until I believe. Walking alone at night, the sky feathered blue-black and slowly folding over me, I pocket my left hand and tell myself a story about my life, a story I call talisman, a story that might end well if I tell it right. Thank you. Goodness, thank you.
Great, awesome. How was that for you?
I heard the cake sound.
There was lots of cake sounds.
It was
yeah.
lovely. It's
That's
such a
good sign.
nice space with nice acoustics and smiling faces, and it's nice to be among poets and poetry lovers. Like, it's just, they're my people.
I would imagine that plenty of people would like to ask things, but maybe I'll start and then we'll see. Good Bones, big poem.
Small poem.
Small poem that
Big life.
that went on.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit about kind of life as a writer for you before and after that poem? You did your MFA in Ohio,
Yeah.
and
I've never left.
and you're still there, born and raised, and
Yeah.
everything. And as I understand, it was a quick, poem came to you very quickly. I would imagine it, didn't seem to you like anything out of the ordinary in terms of poems, but clearly it's really changed things for you, I would imagine. So can you kind of walk us through, Maggie Smith before and after that poem?
Yeah, I mean, I have been, so Good Bones, I had written and published 2 books before I wrote that poem. So I was calling myself a poet, I guess. Like, it wasn't the sort of breakout for me, but it completely changed my life and didn't change my life at all, as things do, right? So those of you who send out poems into the ether, you know this, it takes a long time. So I wrote the poem in 2015. I sent the poem out to print journals where it was rejected several times. And then I sent that batch of poems to an upstart magazine called Waxwing that was pretty brand new at the time, an online journal. And they took, I think, 3 poems from that batch and slated it for summer 2016 publication. So you just forget about it. I mean, you're just writing your poems. I'll be honest, of the 3 poems they published in that journal, Good Bones was my 3rd favorite. Because you don't really know, you don't know what your hits will be and what the B-sides are. And sometimes what I think is a B-side is a hit, and sometimes what I think is a hit is a B-side. I don't know that we're ever the,
Best judge.
right, like we have our favorite things and then other people have their favorites. And sometimes they don't align. And so it didn't strike me as the best poem I'd ever written, and it didn't strike me as any different from anything else I've ever made, except for it happened really fast, so if anything, that makes me trust it less.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the poem was published, it was just a fluke of timing. Quite honestly, if that poem had been published a month before, I don't think anything would have happened. I think if that poem had been taken by one of the print journals that didn't take it in the fall, slated for whenever, nothing would have happened. So really, the poem being published the week of the Pulse massacre in Orlando, and the same week that Jo Cox, the member of parliament, also a mother of young children, was killed in northern England, just sort of galvanized people around that poem in a way that it just was completely shocking to me. I mean, I was basically a stay-at-home, part-time working mother of 2 little kids in central Ohio, which in like the literary sense is pretty small potatoes, right? And so I spent a lot more time parenting, and frankly still do, than I did on poetry. And so when the BBC is calling, or when somebody tells you that Meryl Streep just read it at Lincoln Center and no one told you that was happening in advance, or when a TV show reaches out to you and asks if they can use it, and it's your mom's favorite show.
Which show?
Madam Secretary. It was like one of the most beautiful moments for me personally because, as a child of parents who were not particularly artistic, I'm sort of an anomaly in my family. And so I think they've always read my books, or maybe just, bought them. He's really kind enough to buy them. I'm not sure they've always read them.
Doorstops.
Right, they buy them. They put them on the coffee tables to show their friends that I do something. But it was like something that she understood and could tell her friends about. And it was this point of connection that had nothing to do with like, what's the Paris Review? Is it in Paris?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So a lot of things happened around that poem that made it possible for me to lean into my writing life in a way that I hadn't really, not only had not been able to, but it just had not even conceived of. I always thought I would write poems and I would publish books with a small press for the rest of my life, and I would parent my kids, and then when they went off to school, I would figure out what to do with myself. And so that poem going viral and so many people reading it gave me the chance to like really build, I hate to say career because it just doesn't feel like that to me, but just sort of build my writing life in a way that allows me to come and do things like this, And I just don't think I would be doing this if that poem hadn't been published in a literary magazine online in June of 2016.
Yeah, it's super interesting. When especially with workshops and things and working with younger writers, and everyone wants to know about getting published, and what you're saying is that this was basically not even your favorite poem of the few that you sent in that batch.
No.
And you wouldn't have, conceived of this happening. Did the widespread positive reaction, the fame really of this poem, has that changed the way that you think about that whole process of submitting and like the gatekeepers and quality and things like that?
Not really, because it's still almost always the case that the poem in the batch that I think is the one that someone will want, and I was just saying this to someone beforehand, is not the one that they want. It's always surprising to me that what I attach to isn't necessarily what a reader or editor will attach to. It's so completely subjective. If anything, I find that comforting because, I think we like to have this idea, and this just feels sort of American, that like cream rises to the top and good work will always be rewarded. And it's just not really the way it happens. So much is luck and flukes and happenstance and threading the needle of getting like just the right thing in front of just the right person at just the right time. And frankly, so much is conspiring against that happening that it seems like, frankly, a miracle that every time I write a poem, I feel like it's a miracle. And then anytime I find anyone else who wants it, it feels like a double miracle.
Sure. Yeah.
And I hope I never stop feeling that way, because if this became kind of rote to me, and it just felt like I was just, working in a factory.
Churning them out.
Right. Yeah. I don't even know why I would keep doing it. I will say the one thing that really changed for me in my writing process is I really doubled down after this poem went viral of not caring about the audience. I don't mean you all. I care about you as people. But I had a real moment of freeze after that poem went viral, like right away, and I thought, well, how am I going to write again? How am I ever going to write again? Because now I've peaked. And at first I was like, oh, I've peaked. That's terrible. Like, I can't top that. Like, when you've had a hit song, how do you ever... And then I kind of had to sit with it, and I was like, no, actually, I've peaked. It's so freeing. Like, no one will ever read anything I write. Nothing will ever get as many eyeballs as that poem. Even when I'm dead, nothing will ever get as many eyeballs that I've ever made as that poem. And I don't think statistically it's impossible for me to ever top it.
Sure, yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, so I can just do whatever now. And I think the next poem I wrote after Good Bones was the poem in Goldenrod called Stone, and it's literally a poem about a rock. Because I thought the only way I'm going to sort of overcome the weird stage fright of feeling like people are watching me now, like many more people are watching me now than before, is to write about the tiniest, those little particulars you were talking about. Writing about the tiniest things, and so I started writing poems about sticks and rocks, and like letting them just be sticks and rocks, like keeping it so small and not trying to do anything that could be sort of. It was not Twitter fodder at all. Like, no one is going to co-opt this and make it an anthem for anything. It just can't even be occasional. It's about a rock.
That's it.
That's it. That's all it gets to be. And doing that, working so small, gave me the courage then to be like, oh, okay, no, I can keep doing this. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks.
You mentioned, with Good Bones and a couple of the ones you read as well tonight, that they came very kind of quickly. Can you bring us into that miracle of composition, as you called it? You know, what happens to you when you write a poem?
It feels like, I was saying to someone beforehand, it feels like a weather system coming in for me. I would love to know from you too. Like, sometimes I just get up and I'm moving through my day and I'm like, it's poem weather. I have no idea what that is, but there's something, I just feel kind of like porous and quiet, and like something maybe that I've been thinking about at the back of my mind for a very long time is finally going to coalesce into some kind of articulate, but usually it only comes out as like one phrase. So I'm frequently either in my phone or, I probably have one right now. Like, cold air bronzing the trees to remember them like baby shoes. It's not a poem. I might not use it in anything, but I wrote it on a walk with my dog, who was like tugging on the leash, and I was like, I'm trying to write this thing down so I don't lose it. The air is bronzing the trees, trying to remember them like we do to baby shoes. I don't know if that'll ever become anything. Honestly, if any of you want that, just use it. I've just given it to you. Don't tell anyone. Change, or just make it not leaves or something. It's fine. I don't know if it's worth anything, but honestly, that's how most everything begins. It begins as like one metaphor or one phrase or one little scrap of language, or that tree, that grackle kind of sounds like a typewriter key. That's like, or that bird sounds like a whistle someone's not blowing hard enough and the ball is sort of rattling around in there or something. And I write it down, and sometimes I lose it and I never find it again. So there are probably lots of poems that I have no idea what happened to them, and they're not to be. And sometimes, if I'm lucky, the like snowball picks up snow moving downhill, and I'm able to like, oh, and that reminds me of this and that, and it starts to like accrue in the moment, which is what happened with Good Bones. And I think with Good Bones, what helped it accrue was the anaphora. Life is short, life is short, life is short. Like the repetition almost helped me rev my way into, if I begin the sentence the same way every time, I'm gonna take it someplace new. And so the anaphora was the engine that helped me get that poem done so quickly. Sometimes that helps, but most of my poems are so slow going, and they coalesce over years, and I revise until I hate them, and then I backtrack to an earlier draft and realize what I liked about it. I had like edited out. And then I start to like unravel some of what I've woven. And usually the sweet spot is not draft 1 and not draft 15, but some negotiation between them. It's 7.5 with like a dash of 1 and like the last line of 15 or something.
How do you know you're done?
I don't hate it anymore. No, quite honestly, when I know I'm done, it's the poem, I don't see its flaws. They're still there.
Sure.
Other people will see them, which is why they get rejected. Other people will see them. But for me, like when I'm looking at the poem and it sings to me and it seems to be doing the kind of aesthetic and psychic work that it came to do, and I'm not looking at it thinking, why aren't you doing, I'm not looking at a duck and asking why it's not mooing. Like I'm like, no, you're who you are. You're doing what you came to do. And then sometimes I'm wrong. Like sometimes I'm wrong. Like I think it's done and I send it out, and I don't always revise after it's been rejected a number of times, but sometimes I do. I'll set it aside and I'll let it steep in a dark room,
in the dungeon.
Like a sourdough starter. And then I'll come back to it with fresh eyes, and maybe it's 2 weeks or a month or a year. And if I look at it again with fresher eyes and I still like it and it still sings to me and I still think it's doing what it came to do, then I think it's not you. It's not you. You're fine. You're perfect. It's like the kid who doesn't make friends at school. Nothing's wrong with you. You just haven't found your people.
Yes, right.
You haven't found your people poem, and so I'll try different places.
Yeah.
But sometimes I come back to that poem and I look at it and I immediately see,
The problem.
Oh, wow. No wonder that poem got, kicked back to me. There's something very soft in the middle of this poem that needs to be, toughened up a bit.
Hardened. Yeah.
Hardened, yeah.
Maybe I'll ask you one more, and I don't want to monopolize the mic here, but was there anything that you learned in your MFA program that you feel has been valuable to you as a writer over the long term?
Everything.
Yeah.
Honestly, everything. I know there are some people, and I don't think it's necessary. I don't think you have to have an MFA to write poems. You don't have to have an MFA to publish books at all, frankly. Community is helpful, and I think for me that was where I found it. And I think because I was extremely introverted, it would have been hard for me to seek that community out without the structure of being like given a community. But so much of it was helpful for me, and a lot of it was those other voices that was critical. I'm writing a little looser, I think, than I did as an MFA student. My most recent poems are much looser and sort of talkier than I think my more, they were wound a little tight, those first poems. And I think it was because I was new and I wanted my poems to be taken seriously. And so some of that undoing has nothing to do with my education. It has to do with like having confidence that like as a Midwesterner, I can talk as myself and I don't have to sound like a poet, whatever that sounds like.
Well, that's super interesting. What do you mean by that? Midwesterner, how do you sound?
I don't know. One thing I will say is that be careful about cursing in poems because it may go viral. And then, I really didn't before this. And then I was like, well, we're just going to put the word shithole in a poem. I'm sure no one will read it. Well, friends. But I will say, that's how I talk.
Yeah.
And I think it's how a lot of us talk. And so I'm realizing in my newer poems, and Goldenrod has some of these poems, and even in the newer poems, I'm just giving myself a much longer leash to sort of bring the diction down a little further and to say things a little bit more plainly as myself, and to allow myself to be funny sometimes, which I am in life, but I'm not often in my poems.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And to let myself have digressions and asides and to allow some mess to remain without sort of scrubbing it all out. And I don't think I had the confidence early on to allow myself to sort of show up as my full self on the page just yet. And so that's one of the blessings of aging in general, I think, is you're like, no, this is me.
Just let it hang out.
Yeah.
Awesome, yeah. Well, it sounded like you had a question. What?
But you just mentioned that your language changed, and then, your poem went viral with the word shithole in it.
Yep.
As a young poet, seeing that on the screen and being widely published was very freeing for my own art. And so I wonder if you've found like, did that really, like, that poem going viral and so many people sharing it and reading it and it becoming kind of this, like, cyclical, unfortunately cyclical thing, what did that do for the way that you talk to other poets about art?
Well, I think how it's changed the way, if it has changed at all the way that I talk to other poets about art, I'm not actually sure that it has. But if it has at all, I think it has, it's made me realize even more just how fluky and subjective so much of this is, which I find really comforting. It's also frustrating, right? I mean, it's frustrating. I mean, I sent my second book of poems, The Well Speaks of Its Own Poison, out for 4 years. And if you know what this looks like, every time you send it out, there's also a check attached, or now it's PayPal, I suppose. It's all unsubmittable now, isn't it? But back in the day, it was in an envelope, in a manila envelope with a check. That was the reading fee. And so to send your book out to multiple presses every year for 4 years, I don't even know if I broke even. And then when it finally won a book prize, I was like, oh, I wasn't wrong. Like, I believed in this thing, and it found its people. It just took 4 years. And maybe I would have given up, but I was stubborn. Patience and tenacity. Those are the two things I tell, not just young poets, all poets. Patience and tenacity, patience and tenacity. So for that poem to have had such a wild ride, and yes, it is cyclical. I mean, I've been seeing it pop up with everything happening in Gaza. I've been seeing it pop up with everything happening in Maine. There's never not a reason. There's never not a reason. I mean, there's a poem in Goldenrod that begins, why don't we just leave the flags at half-staff and save ourselves the trouble? Like, why bother even raising them again? I don't understand. Just, like, leave them at half-staff if we're not going to do anything about these things. And so just the flukiness of it, and also the idea that that kind of something is so bizarre, but it can happen to anyone. Like, if it can happen to a mom of 2 small children in Columbus, Ohio, it can happen to anyone. And I just think that's art, right? You just never know what your song might do in the world, or what your photograph or what your painting could do in the world. And it's actually not your job to think about what it could do in the world, because that will stop you from doing it. If you think about where it might go and who might pick it up and who might like it or not like it, that's what I mean by not thinking about the audience. I think about people all the time. I try not to think about readership, because I think it could be paralyzing. It's much better for me to sort of work quietly, and then when I'm happy with it, kick it out of the nest, and then whatever happens, happens. And it might surprise you. It certainly surprised me. Yeah.
Stephen, we've just got a couple more minutes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Yep.
I was fascinated when you read, first you described the Matthew Shepard incident, then you read the poem, and then you said, I never understood the pink fist. So, and then you said you believed in magic and serendipity and, weather coming. So it makes me think a lot of your poems come from your deep subconscious. And has that ever happened to you before, where you read a poem and go, what was I thinking?
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think a lot of it comes from a place I don't quite understand. And I don't want to understand where it comes from. I think, and as a teacher, I'm asked to explain, right? Like, people are always like, well, how do you, I always say, I can teach you how to break a line better. I can teach you how to see opportunities in a poem. I can teach you how to more efficiently use white space. I can teach you sort of like what diction might be sort of most optimal in a poem like this. I can teach you how to title a poem that does a little bit more work than the title you have. I can't teach you how to go to that place in you bring things up from the well. And I honestly don't want to even understand how I do it, because I feel like if the magic didn't happen for me, if I understood it too much, again, it would lose its magic. But so often I'm looking at poems and I think, where did that come from? And I don't know. And I don't know if this has happened to you, but sometimes I find poems on my computer that I don't remember writing. And I know they're mine because they're in Garamond 12. And they're probably in couplets, knowing me, because I have a bit of a problem with those. I'm working on it. There's no support group for people who write. Yeah. I know, there should be a 12-step program for couplets. And I just sometimes look at these things and I know it's mine, it's in my computer, it looks like my work, maybe it even references something a child I birthed said. Like, no one snuck into my house and put that in my computer, but I just don't remember I don't remember it at all. And I do think there's something, oftentimes I tell people, the key to being a poet is just having your antenna up all the time and picking up things. And sometimes I really do, and I realize this is gonna sound so woo-woo, but I also, have crystals on my desk. So this is on brand for me. I often feel like things come through in a way that I can massage them once they've come through. I can work on them. I can tinker with them. That's revision. But the sort of that feeling of flow, that moment when something kind of happens and the words start coming, if it really happens quickly, is it's like inexplicable to me. I don't know what that is. And it's why I keep doing it. Yeah.
You're here. Well, yeah, sure. One last question. Yep.
I know when I was discussing with you outside, we talked about that, we like to do longhand first.
Yeah.
And then type it up. Do you have a first reader? When you finish the poem and you're kind of satisfied with it, do you have a first person that reads back to you or gives you some feedback?
Yep. Her name is Catherine Pierce. She is the Poet Laureate of Mississippi. And she was the first person I met in my MFA program 23 years ago. And I have sent her almost every poem I've ever written for 23 years. And she has sent me almost every poem she has written for 23 years. And now we're kind of getting away from sending book manuscripts, but for the first couple of books that each of us published, we would even send the book, and then we would help each other arrange them and shuffle the pages and take things out or retitle things. And I have I send David Baker my poems and my manuscripts. When Stan Plumley was alive, he was someone I would send poems to. But Katie, my Katie, I call her my poetry wife. And that relationship outlasted my own marriage. And I count on my poetry wife something fierce, because she knows me and she knows my work in a way that we don't even have to really, it's not like workshop where you have to say something nice first. We just turn on track changes and get to business. So she'll just turn on track changes and be like, this, just take this out, this stanza should go up here, this title isn't doing anything, what's happening here, love this, love, 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 what's this? I think this is a typo, this should be a semicolon. And then she sends it back. And I can't wait. When I check my email, if I'm out, I cannot wait to see her notes pop up, because it gives me something to chew on. I don't take all of her notes, and she doesn't take all of mine, but it gives me a sounding board that I value. And 23 years, it's like priceless. That is what I probably value most from my MFA.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Maggie Smith.
No, this was a
been
pleasure.
wonderful
Thank
experience.
you. We'll be out there.
And we'll retire to the back room.